This episode of the Tactics Meeting is brought to you in part by Gallagher Marine Systems. Gallagher Marine Systems is the industry's most comprehensive source of full-service, in-depth compliance support. And by the Washington State Maritime Cooperative, the only non-profit umbrella plan holder dedicated to oil spill readiness for commercial vessels operating in Puget Sound and the Greater Salish Sea. Formed in partnership with Washington State in 1995 to protect these waters, WSMC has long stood at the intersection of maritime response and environmental protection, supporting safe commerce while safeguarding the coastlines we all depend on. Learn more at wismccoop.org. Well, it's time for another episode of the Tactics Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Dan Smiley, and today I'm excited to have with me Doug Schuster from EMSI. I met Doug just recently in a planning meeting for a drill that both of us are going to participate in June in Washington and in Florida. So I'm excited to have Doug to talk about the work that EMSI does for the emergency response community. Doug, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity, and I will talk about emergency management almost any chance I get. So I guess kind of how I kind of got into the business. Are you interested in hearing about that?
I am. How did you get here? So many people come to emergency response through back channels and weird ways. My wife, who was an emergency manager for a hospital in Oregon, just had a big binder dropped on her desk one day, and that's how it happened. So how did it happen for you?
Well, I had joined the Coast Guard, like many people that are kind of in the business and that you've interacted with kind of the idea pretty late in life to go back. I was going to get money, go back and be a meteorologist. So I became an MST, and in my younger days in the Coast Guard, one of your prior guests, Jim Elliott, said, "Hey, I got some money. Is there any kind of training you want to get?" And so University of Florida had a train the trainer program for environmental groups, and I got my first introduction to ICS back then in early 1990s, and then got transferred to the strike team, and we were doing some of the first training within the Coast Guard, and had the opportunity to go to, I think, 8 different fire service schools to kind of learn from the originators, and developed a lot of curriculum, and all of it as a collateral duty for almost my whole career was doing emergency management stuff. So strike team kind of solidified it, and then actually I was kind of part of the training and putting together the Coast Guard's 2 incident management teams when we had a pack area and a land area team. I think my certificate when I graduated the Coast Guard said I had trained over 16,000 people in ICS in my time in the Coast Guard, and I've probably done more of that since.
So you're to blame. You're to blame for how the Coast Guard does it.
Well, I got a little bit more on that story, but yeah, you can say that. Maybe. Back in the day, there was it was kind of like the wild, wild west, and there wasn't a lot of people doing the training. Now, the Coast Guard has, interestingly enough, EMSI, the company that I now work for, was a company that was established 25 years ago, and the first contract they got was the Coast Guard contract. And the original owner of the company was part of FireScope with the Park Service in California, and brought some of his teams and experience in there. And really kind of the start was to get a group of individuals that had real emergency response experience and hold qualifications, national qualifications. So the team was kind of built with a small full-time staff, and then a bunch of people who were in their second careers that were independent contractors, but still wanted to stay involved. So the company's definitely morphed since then from that one Coast Guard contract, and we only do 620 classes for the Coast Guard now because they do most of their own training with the IMATs and stuff.
So, how would you describe what EMSI does today? Because you've morphed over the years.
Yeah, it's been interesting, and I've kind of, like I said, it is part of the first contract. When the EMSI started, I was still in the Coast Guard, and part of the contract with the Coast Guard was to have somebody from the Coast Guard do the class. And we actually turned over a lot of our curriculum to EMSI. So I've really been involved since the beginning, even when I was still in the service, and got to know the people and continue that way. But we've evolved um, more of an all hazard team, and I would say we are probably about 30% firefighters, 40% retired coasties, and then we've got mixtures of all kinds of people from policemen to kind of other government employees that have morphed into what we have today. And our business is really not just government centric anymore. Really, after Macondo, we morphed pretty quickly to respond to that, and oil and gas became a huge part of our business. And most all the major oil and gas are clients of ours. But I also, my one of my um, responsibilities at EMSI is to take care of some of the smaller clients, so pipeline clients and drillers and some of the railroads. And I know that isn't small, but compared to big oil and gas, they're smaller clients, so their needs are a little different. But to me, one of the things I love about what I do is kind of the diversity of the clientele that we deal with. And so we provide training and exercise support, and then lately in the last 7 to 5 years or so, people that we have been training for years upon years have found that, especially in the planning part of a response, that it's hard to maintain competency when you don't do it every day. Um, and we have found that you can put some rube from Kentucky like myself in almost any situation and kind of manage the situation. So that's been a very new expansion of what we do. And I really like it because we feel like we're part of the team and actually are part of the team. And I think it makes us better trainers too with the people when we do it because we're side by side with them.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Well, you're a approved spill management team here in the state of Washington, approved by the Department of Ecology, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're also approved in California, correct?
Yeah, we are, and put a lot of effort into that. And so much so, in 2 weeks, I will be going to California to train OSPR on ICS, and it's going to be their teams that do their spill management. So I'm kind of looking forward to that opportunity to hopefully make an impact to how they are going to be evaluating exercises in the future. I think we can give them I know we can give them a good dose of reality, and that's kind of our goal. We're excited about that opportunity because
Well,
there's quite a few exercises happening this summer in both states to qualify IMTs.
well, fortunately, in Washington, you don't have to qualify them; you just apply, right? There's
Right.
unlike California, which has you do an actual certification exercise every, is it 3 years, 5 years? I don't.
It's a 3 year cycle. But even if, like, one facility in Los Angeles has a shipping side and one has a facility side, both IMTs have to be certified, even though they're in the same building. and it's the same team. So yeah.
Well, California's got a pretty significant disconnect between the people who help plan and then evaluate exercises and the team for the SOSC that actually responds.
Well, and they're invited to be part of the drills, and they're part of the teams, and I've yet to be part of a drill where they, haven't said, "Man, this was great. It was great working with you," and the teamwork was there. But like I said, I think we're learning how to crawl, and I think it will evolve to be a little bit like ICS was designed to be flexible. And I get why they want standards, but I think, like I said, we hope to kind of make an impression when we do that.
Well, I keep hearing the Coast Guard talk about using something called ICS Light. I mean, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's only one ICS and it's scalable and flexible.
I've never heard or used the term light, and like I said, I'm all about flexibility and actually using the tools in the toolbox that work. That one of the problems that the Coast Guard, and really it's both in industry and government agencies, is being able to share databases. I did a government-led exercise with the Coast Guard last year, right about this time, and the Coast Guard had bought software and they couldn't make it work with anybody else. They can't share teams. You can't get on their teams. You can't put anything in their computers, and so they're operating in their own world. And so, to me, that's probably what they're talking about. Is they're going to participate, but they really um, are hamstrung by kind of their technological capabilities. And I get it. That's the world that we live in. I made suggestions about buying standalone computers for their response trailers, and they're forbidden to do almost anything because of the threat of cybersecurity.
Yeah, I've every event that I've had them in, whether it's a drill or a real event that required Teams access, they've had to give me a personal email address in order to get in, which even that is probably violating a rule somewhere or other. But they're trying to do the best they can. They want to do the job they're there to do, and I feel bad for them in a way because their Teams account, their Office 365 account is Department of Defense, and there's just you can talk to your blue in the face. They are not going to change their security. Just not going to happen.
Right. And I do a lot of training with the Air Force and Navy. So kind of the same deal with them too. So it's something you would think in today's world that all this stuff would get easier, but just with cybersecurity around all that. Interesting enough, we use Signal Chat, which has been in the news quite a bit with our government resources, and even the encrypted chat boxes that are out there are now being can be defeated by some AI activities. So I think we're going to continue to see some struggles because if you're on a real response just about anywhere in the world, they're going to be using WhatsApp or Signal to talk, and you can forbid it all you want, but the contractor's going to be using it. It's going to be tough.
Yeah, I know a bunch of. I didn't actually know anybody using Signal, but I know a bunch of responders that are using WhatsApp. But and
So,
there's nothing wrong with Signal. Signal is a well-designed, encrypted platform, but there's just some things that still that's just not appropriate for. So
well, all I can say is through my use of Signal and is if somebody adds somebody to a chat, everybody in the group sees who added that person. So if you got somebody that's not supposed to be on there, somebody's responsible, and it's not a hard investigation. It's pretty easy to find out. So
there you go. Well, you guys have been doing some really interesting responses, a little out of the ordinary responses. Do you want to share one of those with us?
sure. We're also part of the IMT, one of our bigger government contracts with the Department of Energy and the nuclear support team. And so any any incident around the world dealing with weapons or incident they may have at all at nuclear plants, whatever it is. We're part of their team and respond and have responded. So um, about 4 years ago, there was a real cesium release in downtown Seattle. And that was the first application of our team to go work within the Department of Energy. And, it's just like everything else, order from chaos, right? And a lot of really smart people in the Department of Energy, but they needed a little bit of structure, and that's what ICS gives, and it got such good reviews that we are now really part of their team. We deploy for real life missions around the world with them, and pretty interesting. The one that tends to be, go ahead.
It was a hospital event, right? In downtown Seattle.
Yes, sir. It was the University of Washington had a training and research center, a 9-story building right in the middle of their medical facilities. And they were disposing of about 30 years of spent cesium through a sub of a sub. And this is kind of the Reader's Digest version. It's more complicated than this, but they couldn't get the canister to unscrew. And so they hit it with a couple things, and that didn't work. And so then it was a bright idea to get out a bandsaw, and they cut too deep and released the cesium. Cesium's lighter than air, and they had elevators pushing and pulling, and 7 buildings in downtown Seattle were it had some sort of contamination of cesium. And that project went on forever and cost a lot of money. But not a lot of news around it, and nobody got sick or ill, but it was still a really interesting response because cesium was the least of our worries as far as hazards in a research facility. They had the original Spanish flu and some other things, so it's just a really interesting response.
How did you how did it work out interacting with the hospital? Because their emergency plans say that they're going to use ICS, but I know from observing a number of incident command stands up in hospitals that they they don't really do ICS. So how did that interaction go?
Well, really well. Um, they we made a decision pretty soon after our team got there that kind of a non-standard unified command, because we had somebody from the state and we had the federal people, and we even had some Seattle people that were involved in unified command. But we made the decision to make the affected party part of unified command because they needed decisions on moving people and equipment and everything else, and they were affected by everything that we did. And so by pulling them in, they became a partner, and quickly embraced kind of the planning process. And like I said, once again, really smart people that just needed a little direction, and they love anybody who's been on real responses and can kind of see the rigor and how it turns out. It's with me, it's always a win, and they came on board really easily and played well and understood their roles.
That's great. What was your role?
I was the planning section chief.
Oh, that's my favorite role. Bring an order to chaos.
Yeah, I hold 5 national certifications, but I tend to be planning section chief because I'm a control freak. And people tend to like my style, I guess, and ask for me to do that. But I like it, as probably for the same reasons you do, because, like I said, I'm a big team sport guy. I love sports, and to me, ICS, I've gravitated to this because it feels like I'm on a team, and as we all work together to support operations, you can have successes. So.
Doug, you had another interesting case that we had talked about revolving around a response at a jail. Can you share that response with us?
Sure. You know, talking about cesium, that we've said, how in the world did Doug Schuster work a cesium case, right? But it's just something that ended up happening. So Fulton County is a client of ours. So is Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and so is the Atlanta Fulton County Airport do drills and exercises and training. And as COVID was approaching, I got called by their emergency manager and said, "Hey, can you get our COVID response kicked off?" And I said, everything else was falling off the table like everybody else. And I said, "Sure." How long? They go, about 3 weeks. And then they got federal funding, and that 3 weeks turned into 3 years. And so we ran the largest, most most vaccines of any other stadium in the United States, and we were right there with the CDC. And it was, now that I look back on it, we have a lot to be proud of what we did, and our situation unit was really good. But as that was winding down, like a week later, after I'd kind of left the incident, the county manager called and said, "Doug, do you know anything about jails?" And I kind of snickered a little bit, and I said, "What's going on?" And he goes, "Well,
I've
we
watched
did,
I've watched some movies with jails in them.
I may have been, no, I've never been in jail, but um, and I said, "What's going on?" And he goes, "Well, we just had a guy die from bed bugs." And it was the first recorded case that I've found of somebody dying. That he was diagnosed on a Monday, and by Friday he was untreated and died of anemia. And his family, and this is pretty normal for the country post COVID, is inmates went like this and staff went like this, and so not near enough supervision. And we have found, as we've been working this job, that it's not unique to Fulton County. And so once again, order from chaos a little bit and help them develop a inmate movement plan so that they could farm inmates out so that we could do some good rehab refurbish on the jail. When we took over, there was 800 people sleeping on plastic sleds on the floor because they were overcrowded. We haven't had anybody on a sled since December of 2023. We rectified that in about 4 months with that kind of inmate movement plan, plus facilitating release of inmates that had already served time, but the backlog, something, COVID affected everything. Courts weren't open, and so we were able to kind of clear the decks a little bit, but also that gave us an opportunity to kind of harden what's going on in the jails. It's a lot of project management at this point, but like I said, another thing, one of the reasons maintenance is such an issue that kind of took my breath away is 80% of all lockable doors in that jail were broken when we came in, and to me that's just unfathomable. And so gave them a little bit. They run an ops briefing every morning with kind of some ICS principles, and so, like I said, I've seen some things and heard some things, and I'm generally a good guest at a cocktail party if you want to talk about jails, because there's some really interesting stuff going on. But once again, kind of proud of the work that we're doing. Sometimes in any incident, it's hard to see the success unless you kind of look back at a timeline of what you accomplished, and our team's done really well there.
You're also working with the railroads, right? Right here in Washington, with BNSF and others. I mean, that's got to be a bit of a challenge because unlike a fixed facility or even a vessel, these incidents could happen really anywhere, just anywhere.
I think it's some 2 to 3 days. Every 2 to 3 days in the United States, there's a derailment. Uh, Palestine drew a lot of people's attention, but and there is nobody like the railroad. The speed, and the safety of how they move to get a rail back open it's really incredible to watch. But in the last year and a half, I've done 2 derailments. Really interesting one, quickly to talk about was I was in not Vancouver. I was in northern British Columbia, and was taking a bush plane out, and they go, "We've had a derailment at the New Mexico um, Arizona state line," and I went there and kind of flew into Vancouver, drove to Seattle, took a flight, and met the incoming incident commander in Utah, and then we went in together. They had 100 miles on either side of the derailment closed on I-40, and you can imagine the truck backups. And then that's the main rail artery through the United States. They had LPG tankers derail that were on fire and possible, but for 52 hours, both were closed. The rail was backed up 150 miles on both sides. And so you just don't really realize, but a very interesting response to made an incident command post out of a rest area and work with some great people. But yeah, I love the rail clients. My dad worked on the railroad, so I feel a kinship to him when I'm doing those things. And my favorite thing about anything I do is kind of the diversity of clients that I have. My life is never boring.
It sounds like you've got a lot of good experiences that you can reach back into your mental Rolodex and pull a card out from almost anything.
Yeah, and like I said, being a responder, I think makes me and our team better trainers, and training makes us better responders. I did a last week. I did a staging area manager course with a local utility here, and I learned so much from those guys who do it multiple times a year in Florida. So I think it's a nice marriage of what we do to kind of be successful.
Oh, it's incredible. Well, I'm glad we had an opportunity to speak with you about the work that you and EMSI are doing. I'm looking forward to working with you on the drill in June, and hope I get an opportunity to work with you on a response someday. Doug Schuster from EMSI, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the program with us.
Thanks for having me, Dan. I enjoyed it.
If you're getting value from the tactics meeting, whether it's maritime safety, environmental insight, or just good conversation, consider supporting the show. We're a lean crew with a big mission, and your support helps keep the command post running smoothly.